It all started on a quiet Sunday morning when my sister pulled into the driveway with nothing but 2 duffel bags. A tired smile and the kind of calm confidence you only see in people who've been through more than they talk about. She had just returned from her final military deployment, ready to start fresh, and I was more than happy to welcome her into my home. I didn't think twice about what the HOA would say. Why would I? She's my sister, and she earned every bit of peace and normalcy she was finally getting. But apparently, peace doesn't come easy in neighborhoods run by overzealous HOAs. Within the first 48 hours of her moving in, we got a knock at the door. Not a friendly one. The HOA president, let's just call her Karen, for now stood there with a clipboard and a raised eyebrow, asking pointed questions about who my sister was, how long she planned to stay, and whether I had cleared her stay through the proper channels. I politely explained that my sister was family, and that this was my home, not a hotel with a guest registry. Still, that wasn't enough for Karen. The next morning, I looked out my window and saw something I never expected: 2 police cruisers parked outside my house. She actually called 911, claimed a suspicious person had moved into the neighborhood and might be squatting. It was insulting and, frankly, dangerous. My sister had barely been home a full day, and now she was being questioned like a criminal for existing. But everything changed the moment the officer asked my sister for ID. What happened next flipped the situation on its head and left Karen completely speechless. Let's just say, she wasn't expecting what my sister handed over, and the look on her face, I'll never forget it. You'll want to stick around for this. It gets wild. The officer took my sister's military ID, gave it a quick glance, and instantly straightened his posture. You could see the change in his tone, immediately more respectful, more serious. Karen, standing off to the side with her arms folded, looked confused at first. She couldn't read the card from where she was, but the shift in the officer's demeanor made her uneasy. My sister stayed calm the entire time, like she'd been through worse and didn't have the energy to entertain the drama. And honestly, she had. What Karen didn't know was that my sister had served overseas for the last several years, working in some of the toughest conditions imaginable. She wasn't just in the military, she was highly decorated and had just returned from her final deployment. This move was her transition back into civilian life, something we were both looking forward to after years of limited contact and worrying phone calls. But Karen didn't see a veteran. She saw someone who didn't fit her narrow idea of what a proper resident looked like. We had lived in this neighborhood for years without any issues. I'd followed the HOA rules, paid dues on time, and kept the yard clean. But the second someone new, someone unfamiliar showed up, it was like we were being watched under a microscope. Karen even went as far as snapping photos of my driveway the night before. My sister had barely unpacked, and yet she was already being treated like a problem. What made things even more uncomfortable was the way other neighbors started acting. Suddenly, we were getting long stares during walks. The usual friendly waves disappeared. It felt like some silent message had been spread around. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about rules, it was about control. And my sister's presence had disrupted that control in a big way. Over the next few days, things started to feel even more off. My sister tried to settle in quietly. She helped around the house, went for early morning jogs in her old army hoodie, and even joined me at a couple of neighborhood events just to be polite. But it didn't seem to matter. Every time we stepped outside, someone was watching. Whether it was the neighbor across the street suddenly watering his plants for the 3rd time that day, or Karen walking her dog suspiciously slow past our house. The message was clear. We weren't being welcomed. We were being monitored. What made it worse was the HOA's sudden interest in nitpicking everything on my property. First, I got a warning letter about my trash bins being visible from the street, even though they'd been in the same spot for years. Then came a citation about my sister's car. Apparently, overnight street parking was now an enforceable violation. Funny how none of this had ever been a problem before. It was like the HOA was using their rulebook as a weapon, hoping to pressure us out or make my sister uncomfortable enough to leave. Meanwhile, my sister stayed composed, but I knew it was taking a toll. She didn't talk much about what she'd seen overseas, but I could tell this silent, passive-aggressive war was wearing on her in a different way. She'd spent years facing clear threats, and now she was back home being undermined in subtle, petty ways by people who never once asked about her story. It was frustrating to see her treated like this, especially when she'd given so much just to protect the freedoms these people took for granted. Then something strange happened. A different neighbor, Mr. Lopez, who lived 3 houses down quietly, pulled me aside one afternoon. He told me this wasn't the first time Karen had targeted someone. There had been others before us. One moved out, another filed a complaint that mysteriously disappeared. That's when it really sank. And this wasn't just about HOA rules or one bad encounter. Something deeper was going on here, and we had just stepped right into the middle of it. After Mr. Lopez's warning, everything started to feel heavier. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was real. We weren't dealing with just one difficult neighbor. We were caught in something bigger. Something that had been quietly going on in this HOA for a while. Karen wasn't just enforcing the rules, she was using them to control the neighborhood, to push out anyone she didn't like or couldn't control. And now my sister, with her quiet strength and calm presence, had become her latest target. My sister, though, wasn't backing down. She wasn't loud about it, but I could tell she had mentally switched gears. She started keeping notes, tracking every warning we got, every strange encounter, every silent stare. She knew how to stay calm under pressure, and now she was channeling that same focus she'd used in the military into figuring out what exactly we were up against. But the more we documented, the more Karen seemed to escalate. One night, we came home from dinner to find our mailbox open and one of the warning letters mysteriously gone. Another day, we noticed someone had taken photos of my sister's license plate from up close to be accidental. And then there were the HOA meeting flyers that somehow skipped our house entirely, even though every other door on the block had one taped to it. The tension was building like a slow boil, and neither of us could predict what Karen might do next. Things hit a peak when we received a formal notice demanding my sister appear before the HOA board for a compliance hearing. No explanation, no specific rules cited, just a date, a time, and a thinly veiled threat that failure to appear could lead to further action. My sister stared at the letter for a long time before folding it in half and slipping it into her notebook. That's when I saw the look in her eyes, not fear, but resolve. Whatever Karen was planning, she wasn't going to face it alone. What we didn't know was just how far the HOA would go to protect their power, and how close we were to uncovering something they never expected anyone to question. The night before the HOA hearing, we were sitting in the living room, going over everything: notes, letters, photos, trying to make sense of the pattern. My sister was calm, like always, but I could feel the tension hanging in the air. She kept circling one name that showed up more than once on HOA documents, someone we hadn't paid much attention to before. A board member named Evelyn, who rarely showed her face around the neighborhood but signed off on most of the enforcement actions. Something about it felt off. That's when my sister had an idea. She went digging through public records. She'd always had a knack for research, thanks to her intelligence work during deployment. What she found changed everything. Evelyn wasn't just a board member. She was Karen's cousin. And not just that, Evelyn had quietly inherited a large stake in one of the property management companies the HOA was using for its violations enforcement. Every fine, every citation, every forced compliance. A portion of that money was being funneled right back to Evelyn's company. The deeper my sister dug, the more names she found connections between HOA, leadership, and questionable financial arrangements that looked a lot like a money scheme hiding behind HOA policy. This wasn't just about power anymore. It was about profit and the targeting of certain residents that seemed intentional, focused on those least likely to push back: veterans, single parents, new families who didn't know the system yet. Suddenly, everything made sense. The aggressive citations, the vague warnings, the constant pressure. And now, the hearing wasn't just a routine formality, it was a way to intimidate my sister into silence before she could expose what was really going on. But then came the second twist. When we tried to print out the documents for the hearing, the printer froze. Not just that our internet dropped, our home security app glitched, and the file folder she had been working on, corrupted, gone. It was too targeted to be random. Someone knew what she'd found, and someone was trying to stop her. The morning of the hearing, the air felt thick. My sister barely said a word during breakfast. She didn't need to. We both knew this was more than just defending her right to live with family. It had turned into a stand against something much bigger. The files were still missing, but she wasn't walking in empty-handed. Turns out she'd made offline backups the night before, just in case. Years of working in uncertain environments had trained her to never rely on just one plan. When we walked into the HOA meeting room, the energy shifted. Karen was already seated at the head of the table, acting like this was all routine. The rest of the board sat stiffly, some avoiding eye contact altogether. But my sister walked in like she owned the room, shoulders back, face calm. When they asked her to explain her violations, she didn't even address their question. Instead, she calmly slid a thick manila folder across the table. Inside were copies of signed financial agreements, emails tying Evelyn to the enforcement agency, and even old newsletters with manipulated rule changes that hadn't been voted on publicly. The room went dead silent. Karen's face went pale. For the first time, she didn't speak. One board member actually stood up and left the room. Another asked for a short break. But my sister didn't move. She just waited. After 10 tense minutes, one of the newer board members returned with a surprising announcement. They were suspending the hearing immediately and launching an internal audit. You could feel the cracks starting to form. But just as we thought the worst was behind us, the twist hit. Later that night, we got a knock at the door. It wasn't Karen. It was Evelyn. She stood there alone, looking nothing like the quiet name on paper we'd pieced together. And with a strange calm in her voice, she said, "You have no idea who you're dealing with. And this doesn't end here." Then she turned and walked off into the dark. After Evelyn's visit, we didn't sleep much that night. Her words echoed in the back of our minds, threatening, but vague enough to avoid crossing any legal lines. Still, my sister wasn't shaken. She just said, "That's what people say when they know they're losing control." And she was right. Over the next few weeks, everything started to shift. The HOA board was forced to hold a special meeting, this time open to all residents. Word had spread about the financial trail my sister uncovered. A few brave neighbors came forward with their own story: suspicious fines, sudden rule changes, strange warnings. It wasn't long before a formal investigation was launched into the HOA's leadership and their ties to private contractors. Karen quietly stepped down days later, and Evelyn, she vanished from the neighborhood altogether. My sister stayed. She decided to enroll in a local university using her GI Bill and started volunteering at a nearby Veterans Outreach Center. The neighborhood, once stiff and cold, slowly began to open up. Neighbors who had avoided us before started waving. Again, Mr. Lopez even brought over homemade empanadas one evening to thank us for stirring the pot in the best way possible. Looking back, the whole thing feels surreal. All my sister wanted was a quiet place to land after years of service. What she walked into was a battle on a different kind of front, one that didn't require armor, but demanded the same courage. This story wasn't just about HOA rules or neighborhood politics. It was about standing up when it's easier to stay quiet. About defending your right to belong, especially when someone tries to push you out. And as for Evelyn's warning, we're not worried. Because the truth, once exposed, has a way of keeping the right people watching.